Welcome to Focus on Albany. I'm Cynthia Pooler. My guest today is Howie Hawkins, who ran for governor this past election cycle. So, sorry, how did you do? How did the Green Party do? What's going on with you guys?
Well, we don't know how many write-ins we got. That'll probably be out in about 3 or 4 more weeks. We know the raw total of write-in votes was just under 10,000. So, maybe we got a little over half of that, over 5,000, which is, I don't know how much of a statement it will make. I think people that wrote us in felt good about it.
Right.
But, the problem was the Democrats created a impossible ballot access barrier. So it was for the first time since 1872 that only Democratic and Republican candidates were on the ballot for the statewide offices. And for the governor's race, it was the first time since 1946, and the only other time since 1891 when they started issuing, secret ballots, the state started, only the Democrat and Republican was on the ballot. So it's interesting that the Working Families Party got about 4.5% of the vote. And I think a lot of those votes would have gone to the Greens. I got 5% of the vote in 2014. They got about 280,000. In 2014, I got 180,000. So, and now, polled the Working Families Party. So, that tells us that about almost 5% of the voters wanted an alternative to Zeldin and Holcomb. Well, maybe. I mean, the Working Families line is vote for the Democrat whose policies we oppose on our ballot line to send them a message. I think the message it sends is no matter what you Democrats do, we're still going to vote for you. In any case, the vote didn't reflect, I think, what the real spectrum of opinion is out there, because, all the options were not on the ballot.
So I became friends with Diane Sayre, who ran as an independent against Chuck Schumer. And in the petitioning process, she got 66,000 signatures. And I thought, 66,000, how can that be? You yourself have been involved in politics a long time, and you didn't come anywhere near that. So, what's your feeling about the signature thing?
As far as I know, nobody looked at the petition. They're claiming 66,000 signatures. There's no verification of that. Now, she's part of the LaRouche cult, a fascist cult. And, they do have true believers, and they get out there and get signatures. And they got money. So I have no idea, whether it was their own members or a combination of their own members and paid petitioners. But, it's hard to evaluate that because nobody looked at their petition. They could have had people sitting in their apartments taking names out of the phone book. We just don't know. Nobody looked at their petition because nobody took them seriously.
And the Green Party and you yourself got how many signatures?
We got just under 9,000.
Okay. So before the change in the numbers, it had to be 15,000, right?
Right.
Yep. So, I think it's a sad commentary that the system was closed to only 2 parties. Would you agree?
Yeah. I mean, that's obvious, we should have a multi-party democracy, not a 2-party monopoly.
So in other states, is third parties outlawed, or is this one of the only states that has done that?
Well, New York is the worst now. This law, 45,000 signatures in 42 days, is the most difficult petition in the United States, for a statewide petition. In fact, we've looked around the world for a comparable petition. And the closest thing we can find is in Putin's Russia. If you want to run for an independent for the State Duma, their Congress, you need 15,000 signatures in 45 days, which is
Mhm.
close to the old New York standard of
Right.
15,000 in 42 days. And we actually had a bill drafted that we shopped around to Democratic legislators. And I joke with them, we just want to get back to the Putin standard in New York. And they chuckle and say, you're right, but after the election, because they didn't want to cross Hochul and the state Democratic chair, Jay Jacobs, who pushed so
Mhm.
hard to get this difficult ballot access passed. So there are 51 different jurisdictions, counting the District of Columbia, in terms of getting on the ballot, and they all
Mhm.
have different standards. And some are reasonable, many are not. And so, getting on the ballot in this country is something that most voters, take for granted. They think anybody wants to run, they can get on the ballot. And when I was out there petitioning, a lot of, voters were kind of outraged. What do you mean the Green Party's not on the ballot? What happened? And I'd
Mhm.
explain it to them, and they were outraged. Even those people that don't support us, it's like, well, I want the option. Let me make that decision, not some rules that the Democrats rammed through as an attachment to the state budget that had to pass during the COVID lockdown in 2020, when the legislature was meeting virtually. It just got rammed down their throats. It was not much discussion. And Cuomo got what he wanted. We're the party that was taking votes from him. Of course, now he's resigned in disgrace, but he didn't like that. That 5% we got in 2014, that year he wanted to run up the vote, get more than his father ever got, Mario Cuomo. More than he got in 2010 when he was first elected, and he got less. He wanted to run it up to get ready to run for president. And we spoiled this little party. And it did change, I think, some things, because he then supported 3 measures that he had not supported before that election: the ban on fracking, the $15 minimum wage, and paid family leave. So, third parties make a difference even if they don't win the office. We get a substantial slice of votes, and all the politicians got to take account of that. Okay, what do those people want? So
So,
voters didn't have that option in 2022.
so, the months leading up to the election, how did you personally get the message out?
Well, social media, we sent out a lot of media releases on the issues, including the issue of ballot access, and got some news coverage, some following in social media. I, went out wherever I could, where I was invited. The last week of the campaign, I was on the road all week.
Mhm.
There wasn't a lot of that up until then. In fact, the whole governor's race was kind of a snoozer in this state. It wasn't a hot issue. I mean, the national context, I think, was more on people's minds. And, toward the end, the polls showed, the Republican Zeldin catching up to Hochul, the Democrat.
Mhm.
And, I think that is not surprising. You look at the turnout from this election, and Republicans upstate turned out. Democrats who are concentrated downstate did not. And for example, in 2018, the last governor's race, 44% of New York City voters voted. This year, it was only 36%.
Really?
And meanwhile, upstate, it was 55% in 2018, 53% this year. So upstate, where the Republicans are concentrated, their people came out. In the city, they did not. And that's, I think, because Hochul did not give them a reason to. Her 2 issues were abortion and gun control, which the positions she holds have already been adopted. Meanwhile, people are worried about groceries, rent. She had nothing to say about those issues. And Zeldin, while he didn't have a positive program, was blaming Hochul, and she had no response. And then I think, the reporting we're getting from about, what the Democrats did to do turnout. For example, the Brooklyn County Committee, which has a lot of money, didn't spend any money on a ground game. So, and what the Democrats did or really didn't do in New York is probably the margin of difference in the US House now. Because the Republicans flipped 4 seats, They won a seat, my district in Syracuse, they probably should have lost because it's got a majority Democratic enrollment. It's a new district. They counted on gerrymandering and the courts threw that out. They had no ground game, they had no message, and it probably handed the House over to the Republicans. It's still not final, and the Democrats have a small chance, but if the Democrats do lose the House, they can blame the New York Democrats.
I find that absolutely amazing. Out of all of the states in the country, why do you think Democrats in New York will be to blame?
They're bought and paid for by Wall Street, the health insurance industry, the cryptocurrency people. I mean, they respond to their donors, not their voters. They take their voters for granted. The voters are way to the left of the corporate leadership of the Democratic Party. So, you know, the corporate leadership campaigned like corporate Democrats.
Mhm.
And they didn't do well, despite having a 2-to-1 enrollment advantage in New York State. You know, so, and we've had that, you know, really all the time. I mean, Cuomo kind of epitomized that. Hochul was his appointee.
Mhm.
You know, Hasty and Stuart Cousins, you know, are not on the cutting edge of these progressive issues. They're pretty good on the social issues. I mean, New York has advanced on that, like marriage equality, and some criminal justice reforms. But when it comes to economic class issues, they're with the corporations as much as the Republicans are. So the Democratic base and the progressive base is not enthused. So a lot of them didn't vote.
So do you think that AOC star is diminishing?
No, I don't think so. I mean, she's made some of the same criticisms I have of the Democratic leadership. And I think that resonates with the progressive base. So, you know, the Republicans spent, I don't know how many millions, you know, trying to defeat her, and she won with 70%. So I think, you know, she's solid where she is. So no, I don't think her star is falling. I think it's probably, I don't know how much more it can rise. I mean, she's really the face of the progressives in the House.
But she's not there's a bad blood between Jay Jacobs and the you know, AOC and her people, right?
Well, Jay Jacobs is a creature of the machine that's funded by the corporations. AOC is putting out, you know, progressive policies, Medicare for all, Green New Deal, and so forth, that the base wants. So, you know, Jay Jacobs is not elected in a popular vote. He's elected by the insiders meeting in the state committee. So I don't know if his chairmanship is in jeopardy. I mean, they say the structure of the party is so centralized that the governor has really the control. You know, Cuomo consolidated that. And I don't see Hochul wanting to switch horses. She's a corporate Democrat. So with the base, AOC is popular. With the machine, she's a thorn in their side. I mean, I think that's where it's at.
So what particular issues did you run on versus what Hochul ran on and what Zeldin ran on?
Well, first of all, you know, an inclusive multi-party democracy, not just fair ballot access, but ranked choice voting for the statewide offices and proportional ranked choice voting for the legislative body. And by the way, we got 2 proportional ranked choice voting measures passed and 6 more ranked choice voting passed, and only 2 ranked choice voting measures failed. So that's a reform that's advancing around the country, and New York is behind on that. So that's one issue we raised. Of course, the Green New Deal. You know, we got this watered down Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act that was a compromise between Cuomo and the Working Families Party, and it still hasn't been funded. So that, you know, climate action was a big thing. We called for an economic bill of rights, which is basically, let's provide through the public sector, which is more efficient because you just pay for it at cost rather than contracting it out at a cost plus profit. And that would include an income above poverty built into the progressive tax structure. So you get a monthly check every month if you're below the poverty line. That ends poverty. That's what Martin Luther King was advocating at the end of his life. Universal health care, the New York Health Act, and we want to go beyond that to a health service, because the intermediaries between doctors and patients, pharmacies and ambulance companies and so forth have been corporatized, and they're causing extra costs both in the administration and the profits they take. Affordable housing, the good cause eviction law, which has a lot of support around the state, but also let's expand public housing to the point where there's enough of it that it sets a standard in the housing market, so the private rents have to come down to compete with that. So that was affordable housing for everybody, lifelong public education, universal child care through the public sector, through the schools and public housing and so forth, right on through free tuition at public colleges and community colleges and trade schools. So those were the three themes that we ran on it: inclusive multi-party democracy, Green New Deal, economic Bill of Rights. And it's, when we talk about it, it's popular with the people for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Problem was the option wasn't on the ballot.
Mm-hmm. And it wasn't talked about in the media. The media kind of shut you out and they kowtowed to the two parties. How do you feel about the media?
Well, they do follow the horse race, and they do discuss the issues that the two major candidates want to discuss. So for Hochul, it was abortion and gun control, and for Zeldin, it was fear mongering about crime and immigrants, and whining about inflation, even though he had no program to deal with inflation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what was reported by the media. They didn't report on our issue-based media releases. They did give us some coverage, because I think a lot of the media, including the editorial boards, is kind of outraged at what Cuomo did to the ballot access issue. So we did get coverage, New York Times, New York Post, Times Union, NPR, PBS. We did get some coverage on that. And I think, it's an important issue. And I'm glad they covered it. It's unfortunate they didn't, include us as a counterpoint in the ongoing narrative to what Hochul and Zeldin were talking about. Even when we're on the ballot, it's hard to get that, because, we're considered sort of an afterthought, so maybe we get a mention at the end of an article or we're in a sidebar, but not part of the main narrative. And that's where the media, they should report on the issues and let the voters decide, rather than decide which candidates are worth covering and which aren't.
So if the Republicans had chosen another candidate other than Zeldin, do you think they would have had a better shot of winning?
I don't know who that would be. It would have to be somebody that was clearly not in the Trump camp, but could still get the Trump voters. Somebody like Michael Lawler, who beat, Sean Maloney, whatever his name is, the guy that was head in the Democratic campaigns but lost his own race. That's the kind of Democrat. Zeldin had baggage that, at least enough. It was only a 6% spread. It should never have been that close. I mean, Zeldin was caught with his, basically his pants down. He tried to cheat to get another ballot line.
Right.
His campaign photocopied 11,000 signatures and sprinkled them into the petition and submitted them. That's, obvious fraud, and the DA in Albany supposedly looking into that. I mean, what's taking him so long? And it wasn't just Zeldin. He signed all the volumes of the petition, but reportedly, according to the Albany Times Union, those petitions were assembled, including the fraudulent, petition sheets that were photocopied, in the Republican headquarters in Albany. So, and this is a guy who was claiming Biden's election was fraudulent. He's an election liar. Yet he turns around and commits this obvious fraud on his own petition. Hochul, should have been, hammering away at that, and she didn't. we put it in our news releases, and when we had an opportunity, spoke about it, but I mean, good God. So yeah, the Republicans, if they had a better candidate, probably could have won. I will say, Zeldin was effective, fear mongering, getting his base riled up about crime and immigrants with a bunch of nonsense. And then, the inflation issue was easy. The Democrats are in charge, so blame them, even if you haven't got a real program to deal with it. So, I saw that like in the ads in my congressional race. The Democrat, all the ads had a picture of him and Hochul. This is for running for the House of Representatives, the federal government, but linking him to Hochul and a bunch of stuff about, spending too much to create inflation, and, you don't want Hochul's buddy in Congress. It was kind of bizarre, but I think effective. So a lot of independents said, yeah, we got another corrupt Democrat. The Democrats are running things. Things are going downhill. I'm going to vote for the Republican, who happens to be he's not so much an election liar, but he is definitely a Trump kind of Republican. And very conservative, on abortion, for example. So he doesn't really represent the district. I think the Democrats better find a better candidate. If they do, they could beat him in 2 years, I think. But
so did you lobby to get into the debates?
I did issue a news release saying I ought to be in the debates. I did send a question to the moderators, Susan Arbetter and Harold Lewis. I asked them to ask Hochul and Zeldin how they felt about being all alone up there without the Green and Libertarian candidates like previous debates. But they didn't ask that. So, I tried, but I knew it was a long shot. Putting a write-in candidate in the televised debate, Spectrum News, unless we had, massive amount of money and a very visible campaign, like Byron Brown had to, take the mayor from the Democratic nominee, India Walker, Buffalo, or Linda Murkowski in Alaska, about 6 years ago. The writing campaign, Spectrum News wasn't about to say, oh yeah, these guys were serious. Me and the Libertarian candidate, Larry Sharp. Yeah, we were serious, but we weren't on the ballot. So that was enough for them to leave us out.
So what's in store for the Green Party looking ahead?
Well, I think we need to do what the election results on Tuesday show. There are 137 Greens elected around the country. They're all local. When we ran statewide, or even for the House of Representatives, in most cases, we got less than 1%. And those are tough races. I mean, it takes money and visibility, and in some cases, we're not on the ballot. In Massachusetts, they needed 3% to get a ballot line, and their two candidates for statewide office for Secretary of State and Auditor got 2.9%. So that was disappointing. On the other hand, in Wisconsin, where the Democrats were able to knock me off the ballot in 2020, because we had the petition, they had a candidate for Secretary of State, needed 1%. She got 1.6%. So got a ballot line there. So kind of mixed results. A lot of the reason we ran those larger races was to secure ballot access. But as far as being players, Matthew Hope, probably the most well-known Green candidate. He was running for U.S. Senate in North Carolina. He got 0.8% of the ballot, of the vote, which was pretty much par for the course, for a little bit better by, 0.1% than, the others, 0.6, 0.5, 0.7, 0.8. But in the local level, we can win, and we do win, and we win in a high percentage. And that's where I think we got to go. We got to push to get thousands, not just hundreds, elected to local office. That creates a foundation for then running candidates for state legislature and U.S. House of Representatives that are credible. They've been in office, they've done good work, and people say, hey, we elected them, to city council, why not to the state legislature or to the House of Representatives? And the other thing I think we got to do is push hard for more ranked choice voting and proportional ranked choice voting to create proportional representation in legislatures. When we went into 2020, we barely had 20 jurisdictions that had ranked choice voting. there were 55 plus 2 states going into Tuesday, and we got 8 more. So what? That's 63 plus 2 states. And in Nevada, it was on the ballot. It's still, the result isn't yet known. So when I say we won 8 out of 10, what I'm really saying is we won 8 out of 9 with the 10th still to be determined. So I think that's the other thing we got to do. Because once we have ranked choice voting, people can vote for us without worrying that it will spoil the election. The split the center left vote and the far right Republicans get elected. And if it's proportional representation, every party gets their proportional fair share of representation. So if the Greens are a 10% party or a 20% party, we get 10 or 20% of the seats in legislatures. So I think that's where we got to go. Local elections and replacing the single member district winner take all system with ranked choice voting and proportional representation.
So I would assume that you're going to stay in this fight then, right?
Yeah, I've been in the fight. Well, I can't even count how many years, since the mid 60s. So,
Right.
now we're in the mid 2020s or headed for the mid 2020s. So that's what, so it's like 60 years, isn't it? Damn.
Mhm.
I'm
Yeah.
getting old. I'm getting old, but I'm not stopping.
Do you think you'll see, nobody can look into the future, but the standard of living for many Americans is not the best. How much worse do you think it has to get before people look for alternative parties and alternative candidates?
I think most progressive-minded people vote defensively. They vote for the Democrats because the Republicans are going to the far, far right. They're, authoritarian, anti-democratic, racist, xenophobic, misogynist. So progressive-minded people, they vote defensively. That's why electoral reforms I was talking about are so important, so they can vote positively for a more progressive program that the Greens present without worrying about helping the Republicans. What triggers movements is not so much absolute immiseration, poverty, as hope that things can change, or outrage, and usually it's police brutality that sparks these things. Whether it was George Floyd and Black Lives Matter here in 2020, or the Maidan revolution in Ukraine when Yanukovych beat the crap out of a bunch of students as they were about to leave in November and kicked off, months of mass demonstrations. Repression, often, we see that now in Iran. Masses of people out on the streets. It's not just about the hijab. It's about police brutality and, democracy issues. So I think, so you can't predict when movements will jump off, but I don't think, the idea that it has to get to a certain level of bad, people being this poor, before people will fight back. They have to see hope that it'll make a difference, or they have to have something that really pisses them off. And often that's, repression, police brutality. So, that's my thoughts. I think, what the left, the progressives, the Greens have to do is keep educating the public, presenting their issues, and getting better organized. So when these movements break out, they're influential in those movements. We haven't been so much. Occupy was an example. Nobody knew that was coming, although objectively, you'd have to say, coming out of the Great Recession, the banks are getting bailed out and we were getting sold out, like our slogan during Occupy. The problem was the left wasn't there with an organization that people could get involved in that, had what sounded like, realistic solutions. So Occupy, it went every which way and had, everybody from libertarians to LaRouche's to, anarchists, socialists. I mean, it was all over the place. And it really didn't come to a common agenda. And in fact, some opposed coming to a common agenda, which was kind of crazy, before the state, shut them down. And we know they did. I mean, we do know that the Obama administration was consulting with mayors and police departments around the country to get Occupy off the streets. So what I'm saying is the left needs to be better organized. So when the movements break out, we're there with some perspectives that the movement might adopt and some organization that it might use.
So you've been involved in politics for a long time. Is it still your belief that electoral politics is the way for social change in America?
It's part of what's needed. We also have to be campaigning, building movements, building organizations between elections. But to say that we should give up on elections, I think is wrong, because it's a great platform. It gives you, as a candidate, as a campaign, an excuse to knock on any door. Not so much when you're, in between elections. It's seen more as an intrusion. So, and you can get, if you establish yourself as a credible movement, you can get in the media. I mean, here in Syracuse, for years they excluded me until the media, the reporters started in one memorable case. Who was it? The Chamber of Commerce had a debate. I was running for mayor, and the moderator opened the debate, and he was from a major news organization here, opened the debate by saying, and I was in the back watching, he was saying Howie Hawkins should be up here on the stage. And the Chamber of Commerce, which was one of the last groups to keep excluding me, cried uncle after that. They were embarrassed. So,
Wow.
if you got a reasonable program and a serious effort, not just a token campaign, you can break into local media, which is looking for ways to sell newspapers. And the Greens are interesting. We're good stories. We make good copy. We make good visuals on the broadcast media. We make good sound bites on the radio. So the idea that we're excluded is wrong. If you're not in the media, maybe you need to look at your media work rather than just playing the media, because particularly the local media has got, they're trying to survive. Now, the bigger networks and, that's a tougher wall to, door to break open. But I believe we can do it. It's the same thing. When we're at the point where we're getting 5, 10, 15% of statewide elections, that makes a difference as to who's going to win. So even if we're not in the lead, our impact means we got to be covered. So I think electoral politics is a place where you can do that much better than, street politics. We've had massive demonstrations and the media more and more has ignored them. So they couldn't ignore the George Floyd thing because that was so massive. But, the smaller protests that we constantly have, it's easy for the media to just not report on them. And so we got to have electoral politics as well as street politics. We got to do both.
Okay, Howie. I always enjoyed talking to you, and I'm sure we'll talk again. So you've been listening to Howie Hawkins, who ran as a write-in candidate for governor in 2022. I'm Cynthia Pooler. This is Focus on Albany. And if you like this show, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you. Thanks so much, Howie. Thank you for listening, everyone.